Hello and welcome to the Tournament Center here at Pro Tour Cons of Tarkir in lovely Honolulu, Hawaii. I am Brian David Marshall. I am joined by Pro Tour Hall of Famer Randy Buehler, and we are going to go on our quest for Jeskai. So talk a little bit about the deck. You've been watching a lot of the different versions of the deck. You've selected a Jeskai deck from the field that you think is excellent and is performing really well. Tell us what this deck is doing and why it's such a struggle for you to name it.
I mean, there's a bunch of different versions of this deck floating around. We just kind of grabbed one to be kind of, an example of the sorts of things people are doing. It's blue, white, red, obviously. It tends to have a bunch of burn spells. It tends to have a bunch of creatures. And it gets these draws where if you can go like turn 2 Seeker the Way into Mantis Rider, you can come out super aggressively and just kill the opponent before they have time to set up shop. But you can also get these draws that are just kind of a little slower and more reactive, and you sort of kill that, and then eventually start burning them, sometimes all the way down from 20. Dig Through Time is the card that I think makes this a particularly challenging deck to really understand. Dig Through Time just gives it this late game potential, gives it the ability to look at the top 7, choose the best 2 cards for the current situation.
Right, and that situation can be very different. You could look at that same 7 over the course of 3 matches. I choose 2 very different cards each time, based on where they fall in terms of the threat matrix.
Yeah, and you also see a lot of these decks will have a sideboard that allows them to really shift the role that their deck wants to play. You can sideboard into End Hostilities and Anger the Gods and be the sort of red-white blow stuff up control deck. You can shift into more aggressive aspects of the deck. It's a great deck.
Well, let's take a look, see how the deck's broken up here on camera. We're going to start with the creatures. Talk to me about the creature slate. Is this pretty consistent across what you've seen?
Yeah, everybody's got 3 or 4 Seekers of the Way. They've got Mantis Riders. They've got Goblin Rabble Masters. You'll sometimes see a Raise the Alarm floating around these lists as well. But this is a pretty good example of the creature set. It's usually only around 12. Like maybe the light ones are in the 10 range, maybe up to 14-ish. Sometimes you'll even see like a Stormbreath Dragon floating around the top of the mana curve. But these are the guys that are in all the versions. These 3.
Talk to me about Mantis Rider, because this seems like such a. It's not a vanilla creature by any stretch of the imagination. It's like vanilla with like Heath Bar Crunch pieces in it, right? It's a 3/3 flyer for 3. It's got Vigilance and Haste, but like what makes this card such a staple of this deck?
Well, it's the 3/3 part with the flying and the Vigilance and the Haste. I mean, it's just super efficient. 3 power haste and pretty close to unblockable on turn 3.
Right.
Like you just don't see that in a Magic card. It's really, that's the reason you play this deck. The thing is, the draw where you're able to play Mantis Rider on turn 3, you've got enough multi-lands that it comes up a lot, and that's just so much more aggressive sort of power hitting the opponent than anybody else can muster that quickly in the game.
So you're able to get in, and then if you have to trade or eat a removal spell or do something, it's still up and forces your opponent to react to it.
And Vigilance is nice too, the fact that you can block, whether you're sort of eating the other guy's Goblin Rabble Master tokens, or kind of the worst case scenario, you wind up doing at least 3 damage, maybe 6, and soaking up a burn spell. Right. Super efficient card.
Seeker of the Way is a card didn't hear a ton of talk about. I know Craig Wesco posted something on Facebook about it, that this was a card he was thinking about immediately, but didn't see a lot of other people talking about it. And I think we all kind of saw it maybe going into the white weenie decks or whatever the white heroic decks would be, but it's really found a home here.
Yeah, it's prowess. The fact that it gets bigger is nice. The fact that it gets lifelink is so good. And you're playing lots of instants in this deck. You're burning a creature mid-combat, suddenly growing your guy and giving him lifelink. Or again, Raise the Alarm is always a fun trick to throw
we
over the
watched a
top.
match on camera yesterday where 3 Goblin tokens are attacking into a Seeker of the Way. And it's like, I'm going to Raise the Alarm. I'm going to then tap things to stoke the flames. My Seeker of the Way becomes a 4/4 lifelink. It was a little grotesque. I mean, Goblin Rabble Master has been a fixture since it's been printed in Standard.
Definitely.
That really just puts the pressure on an opponent to deal with it very quickly.
So those are the creatures.
Yeah.
We can look at the burn spells. This is a lot of burn spells.
That's 16 burn spells.
16 burn spells. Magma Jet isn't a 4 of in all the lists. Some people will hedge a little bit, and you might see a Banishing Light in that spot sometimes. But yeah, this is a lot of ability to deal a lot of damage to the other player. And this is why some people are saying maybe it's a Jeskai burn deck. Maybe Mantis Rider is really just a glorified lightning bolt that does, burn you for 3 every turn, and you're supposed to think of this as a burn deck. I mean, certainly there are plenty of games where all 20 points of damage are done via burn spells.
Wow, and Jeskai Charm, 4 damage to target opponent, but also creatures you control getting +1/+1 and lifelink, very
How many Goblin Rabblemaster tokens do you have? Seeker of the Way goes up to 4/4 with 1 Jeskai's Charm. Yeah, no, you have a lot of options with that Jeskai Charm. It's super nice in this deck.
And Magma Jet, I've heard people calling the deck Jetskai. Just saying, while we're out there making this decision, let's take a look at the next set of cards. More removal, card selection, and then Planeswalkers.
Absolutely, yeah. Sarkhan hits super hard. It's always tricky, like how many Sarkhans do you play? How many dragons do you play?
Yeah.
It's usually a couple of Sarkhans and then maybe round out with dragons. Or this particular version of the numbers has 3 Sarkhans. Dig Through Time's another one. Maybe it's 2, maybe it's 3, maybe it's 4, maybe it's 2 in the main and a couple more in the sideboard is certainly a setup that you've seen. But these are super powerful cards that give the deck a lot more resiliency than if you think of this deck as the beatdown in the format. We've been calling it Jeskai Aggro because it looks like it's positioned as, well, this is the aggressive deck in the format. 2-drop, 3-drop, burn that, burn you. It feels like an aggro deck, but these cards give it a late game potential that aggro decks just don't really have.
I like Jeskai Zoo for that reason. Zoo is a deck that's able to be, I've got this crazy beatdown draw, I've got this crazy burn draw, or I've got this crazy just control your board and eventually wear you down draw.
Yeah, that's kind of what Zoo has been meant to mean for 20 years. Right? You go back to Scott Johns in the 90s, playing Kurt Apes, and that's kind of what Zoo's done. It's like a dozen decent, efficient monsters.
Right.
Even the Nakatl decks, that's essentially what they're doing, right?
So,
weird to have a Zoo deck without green in it, though.
Yes, very strange. So is this all the creatures and spells in the deck? Let's take a look at the next set of cards. No.
Right.
Wow.
That is a fun one. Not in all the decks. It's in some of the decks, but this is the kind of card that if your opponent doesn't know it's coming, you can just get them. You can just win games out of nowhere by surprising somebody. And some of the list, maybe it's in the sideboard, maybe it's happening, but this could be anywhere from a 0 of to a 4 of.
Honorable Passage is a card that I think you and I remember well from, way back in the early days of Standard as a sideboard card. But this is like an Honorable Passage you can just main deck, right?
Yeah.
People are just really fighting over this card. All right, so now we're looking at the lands.
Sure.
This is how do we make this all work?
Well, you got your enemy color Pain Lands, Shivan Reef, and Battlefield Forge. In the mana in Standard right now, you kind of have to choose whether you want your mana to be painful or slow. This deck has gone painful, mostly. The Pain Lands are super good. You're the aggressive deck. You can afford to take a little bit of damage to make sure that you're able to cast your spells. And you'll see with the rest of the lands, though, it's also worth having temples, some scry. Right. Maybe not 8 in all of the versions, but even if you want your lands, even if you want to be aggressive and want your lands to come into play untapped, you still want 4 temples at least,
right?
And maybe as many as 8.
And then a mana confluence because your land is painful. Taking a look at a sideboard, you talked about the idea that someone can switch into a more controlling deck, and you see End Hostilities there.
Oh yeah.
Not a card you're expecting out of a deck that's playing Mantis Rider and Goblin Rabblemaster.
And kind of hard to call it an aggro deck when it's Anger the Gods End Hostilities, right? This is why it's so tricky. I really think of these decks as it's a 75 card list, and depending on what your opponent is up to, you want to be just a little bit slower than them. But if they're super slow, you want to be a lot faster than them. That's really how Magic works. You either want to be a lot faster or just a little bit slower.
I've seen a couple of different decks this weekend that have this kind of 75 card, and I'm going to pick 60 to start with.
Right.
And it really reminds me of the heyday of Japanese Magic, 2005, 2006, where they would have these transformational sideboards where their deck would change very much, almost like they wanted a day 1 deck that then switched into a day 2 deck.
Right. And you can see they've got more sideboard options as well for you guys to look at. More deflecting palms, more permission, more card drawing, maybe Karanos. You get all kinds of different options you can have. You can put together the sideboard of cards that you like, and that give you this ability to just, all right, which deck do I want to be playing this round?
So this isn't one of each here. We're showing people some of the options that we've seen across a couple of different Jeskai !!!!! decks.
Precisely.
So far.
Yeah, that's the deck.
All right.
I just wish I knew what it was called.
So if you are playing Friday Night Magic, this is a deck you want to either be playing with or prepared to face off against.
Definitely.
It's very popular out on the field there today. You're going to see a lot of this deck in the top 8, I think.
Probably.
So Jeskai, help us please.